Hello once again. Before we get to rendering our scenes, I realized there's one more kind of important thing that we need to add to our scenes in order to make it feel cyberpunky, and that is a wet ground. Having these highlights and reflections it really helps bring some more kind of life and character to the city, so that's what I want to cover in this video. So let's jump into our scene. This is right where we left off in the last video. And the way that I added the wetness is a few different ways. So the first thing that I did, this will take a second to preview. I'll turn off the parts of the scene that I don't need to help speed this up. But the first thing I did is I just changed the road texture from a regular dry road to a wet road texture. Okay, so I went on CG Bookcase and there's a number of roads. I believe I used one of these two. I don't remember which one. But if we look at this, we can see we've got some patches of wetness that are a little bit more reflective than some of the drier parts of road. So it gives us some nice contrast there in the road. That's the easy one to do. Okay, so you can see the road that I currently have. I will jump over to the shading workspace. Let's turn off, like I said, I'm going to turn off the truss collection, the electrical panels, and we'll turn off basically everything except for the street and my lights and cameras. I'll leave those on as well. Okay, so we'll grab the road. We'll look in textured view so we can see these changes. And what I'm going to do, we have road asphalt. I'm going to just hit X to get rid of that. Click new. Call this road wet. And same thing that we've been doing with Node Wrangler add-on enabled. Control Shift T. And we'll navigate to our texture library. And I gotta remember what I called it. I didn't call it asphalt. I think I called it, yep, there it is, highway road wet 01 4K. So I will grab all of those. Can't remember if I used the height. I don't think I did, but I'll import them all anyway. Okay, there's everything. See, one of those textures was a mask texture, which we don't immediately need. So I'm not going to worry about that. Okay, so that's in. Now we just need to place it. So we can go into our mapping node and adjust the location. Actually, the X is fine. Let's push it along the Y. I like seeing the double yellow lines there. And I think I can adjust the scale a little bit as well. I would like to see the double white lines in there. And we'll go something like that is going to work. And then we can adjust it in the X if we want to kind of line up maybe a nice puddle along the way. So kind of slide this around until we get a nice puddle. It may help to look at this in rendered view. It'll make everything a little bit more obvious as we go. There we go. So now we can kind of see the parts that have puddles. Maybe we want to slide this. A little tough to tell which way we're sliding, but we'll go with that. Okay, so the street's done. That was easy. Let's work our way towards the wall. And so now we'll deal with the curb. Now, for this, I don't have a wet kind of cement texture ready to go that would work for a curb. So what we can do is we can use our nodes to make some adjustments there. And it appears as though I haven't even given this a base texture. So I guess I'll need to do that first. So I will bring in my textures, and in this case I used, I'm assuming one of these concretes. Let's see, we've got, I don't believe it was that one. Yeah, concrete 25 looks right. So I'll bring that in. I only need the color, the normal, and the roughness. I don't believe I use the displacement. Actually, I'm going to do a shortcut. I'm just going to import it from my other scene, so give me just a second here. Okay, I'm back. I've got my curb texture in. The one that I ended up using, if you're following along, was concrete 25. I think the only changes I have, I'm not using the displacement texture, so we can actually just Control X and get rid of that to save a little bit of memory space in the file. Did invert my green channel. And then I also used an RGB curves just to bring down the color here. So let me undo that. I just hover over the node and hit M to mute it. I don't know why it muted. Oh, because that one's selected. We want to select that first. There we go. So that's without the curves. And that's with the curves. So you can see it's a little bit darker. So there's my texture. Now to make it look wet, what we need to do, wet surfaces generally have a couple of different attributes change. One, they're obviously a little bit more reflective, a little shinier, to varying degrees. And then also they tend to be a little bit more saturated and a little bit darker. So that's what we're going to replicate. Let's start with just the tonal values. So I'm going to go to color, hue saturation, and I'm going to drop that node right after the RGB curves. And we're going to increase the saturation. 1.5 looked good in my test. And then we are also going to decrease the value. I'm going to go 0.42 again is what I used in my tests. Okay, so it's darker. And for this, we may want to, again, look at this in a rendered view. See if that will help us kind of visualize what's going on. And I'm positioning the camera so that there's a light behind it, and that will help catch some highlights. All right, so it's darker, a little more saturated. Now we need to deal with the reflectivity, which is going to be, we're going to add a gamma node. So add color gamma. And we're going to drop that after between the roughness and the principal node. So I'm going to drop that right in there. And then as we increase this gamma value, it's going to basically decrease the roughness. But it's still using the texture, so it's still going to be varied. So I'm going to increase it. And as we go, I go to 1.6 seems to work. And actually, looking at my notes here, looks like I actually want the value to be 0.6. Yeah, it's all to taste. I probably could have left it at 0.4. Okay, so that's going to be a little bit darker. Let's let this resolve for a second and see if that looks wet enough. We may need to increase that gamma some more. Yeah, I think we might. Let's try 2. Okay. We may come back to that. That's still not looking quite as wet as I'd like, but we have one more trick up our sleeves that will help sell the effect. For now, let's jump over to the sidewalk and do the same sort of thing. So I'm going to add in a hue saturation node. Drop that right there. And the saturation is going to be 1.5 again. It's not always going to be 1.5. I just found that for both of these, it looked pretty good there. And again, we can jump out to material preview, so this goes a little bit faster. But if we hover over this and hit M to mute it, you know, it's not really updating very clearly. So might have to be in rendered view to see that. Let's go see how it looks here. It's also, I know that our HDR, not our HDR, but our colored lighting is kind of making it tough to see exactly what changes we're making. So maybe we'll go to a built-in HDRI so we can see these effects a little bit better. And again, I'm going to rotate the camera so that the light is on the back side. Oh, I should also note, you can see that this looks really terrible with the displacement. I currently have, I don't have Simplify enabled. I should have Simplify enabled just to speed things up. But let's decrease this value now. So I'm going to go 0.42 on that value. It's going to be a little bit darker. And then we'll add in our gamma node to the roughness. And this I'm going to go with 2.38 is what I used before. Okay, so now you can see that we've got this nice sheen on it like it just rained. It's not completely underwater, but it looks like it just rained. So that's great. Okay, so now we've got things are feeling generally pretty damp. You can see that the storm drain here, I didn't add the rust texture. So let me go ahead and just append that from my other scene. That's probably called rust, maybe? Yes, it's called rust. I'll go ahead and append that. And then I will assign rust. And you see this one, it's from my other scene that I already did this, so it's already got the, it's got a curves adjustment just to make it a little bit more saturated, and then it's also got the hue saturation value. You can see the saturation is 1.2, the value is 0.6. It's got a gamma added and a gamma value of 1.8. And then I'll just select this, shift select that, Control L, make links to materials. So now that's got the material as well. Okay, textures are applied. Now, for the part that I think is really going to sell this, we've got some standing water on the road, and that looks great, but I'd like to add that to the sidewalk and to the gutter kind of curb as well. So to do that, the way that I'm going to do that is with a separate plane. So I'm going to go into solid view, and I'm going to go into local view on my sidewalk and go into top view, and shift S, cursor to selected. Okay, you can see the center is right there. I'd rather the center be in the center of the plane, so let's hit Q, my quick favorites. I'm going to set the origin to the geometry, and then we'll shift S, selection to undo that. Shift S, cursor to selected. Okay, the cursor is there, right in the center of my, or not in the center, but close enough. Let's add in a plane, and I'm going to first name this, and I'm going to call this sidewalk puddles. Okay. And I'm going to go into edit mode, and I will move these vertices and snap them over there. Let me turn on my screencast keys. Okay. Grab these vertices, G, X, hold down Control, and snap them. I have vertex snapping enabled. G, Y, snap those up there, and G, Y, and snap these down there. Okay, so it's the exact same size as our sidewalk. It's actually in the exact same position as well. Now what I want to do is I'm going to give this a new material, and I will call this puddles, and just temporarily, I'm going to change this color to like a bright yellow. Okay, this is just a temporary thing so that I can see where it is, since the objects are on the same spot. I need that to kind of tell them apart. Okay, so we've got that. Now what we need to do is, if this is going to be puddles, we need to position it. So let's get out of local view here for a second. Or actually, no, we could probably stay in local view. So let me grab sidewalk again. Let's go back to local view. And if we go into rendered, we have a displacement modifier on the sidewalk. Okay, and what that does is it's going to actually physically move the surface up and down. So we need to, in rendered view, we need to see that the result of that displacement so we can properly place our sidewalk, or our puddles. So if I hold down Shift and I move it just in the Z direction. Let me also turn off simplify. Just make sure that on our sidewalk, good, we've got the adaptive subdivision. Just want to make sure we're getting a full quality here. Okay. GZ. And I just want to kind of fill in a few of these areas. Not all of them. You see, as I go up higher, more of the ground is kind of flooded. As I go lower, it's just in smaller parts. So I think maybe something like that is going to work pretty well. Yeah, I think we'll go with that. Let me also, while I think about it, I'm going to jump into edit mode on the puddle object. I'm just going to subdivide it a few times, just so we got a little bit more detail there when we need it. Okay, so we've got the puddles placed. Okay, it's giving us a decent amount of water, standing water in our scene. Now we need to work with the material. So we'll select that again. Make sure that we are on the correct puddle material. We'll set that base color back to white, so I'll just desaturate it to 0. And then I'm going to bring the specular value all the way up to 1. I will bring the roughness down. You can go to 0 if you want perfectly clear water, but I'm going to go 0.01. So maybe there's a little bit of fogginess in there, not much. And then we have the index of refraction. So the IOR for water is 1.33, possibly a third 3, I don't remember. But 1.33. And I believe that's it for the shader. So now if we look at this in rendered view, you can see our standing water. That's looking pretty good. And now, let's try to make this look a little bit more like water and not perfectly still. Okay, so the way I'm going to do this is procedurally, actually. I'm not going to use an image texture. I'm just going to use a built-in noise texture in Blender. So in our shader editor here, we're going to affect the displacement on the puddle. So to do that, let me turn off that crosshair there. We need to select our puddles, and we need to give them a subsurface modifier. And remember, we have the experimental feature set enabled here in the render panel. I'm also going to switch this to CPU, just because I'm screen recording and all that, and I don't want to crash Blender. So we need to switch this to experimental. That way, when we add a subsurface modifier, we can enable adaptive subdivision. That's good. We also, if we want this to be a displacement shader, we need to go to our material settings and make sure our displacement is set to either displacement and bump or displacement only. Displacement only will be fine for us. Okay. The other thing is if we kind of zoom out here, you can see that the corners are rounded. So let me go back to the subsurface modifier and set it to simple. And while we're here, we can see that we've got kind of a jagged edge preview on the sidewalk. So let me grab the sidewalk, and I'm just going to set the dicing scale to 0.25. And that's going to, once it updates, you can see it's going to smooth up those edges. Okay, great. So now that we have that, and we can see where our puddle is. Oh, actually, I forgot one important thing on the puddle. And I bet you've probably already figured it out. This doesn't look like water, and that's because it's not transparent. So, or transmissive. Let me turn the transmission up to 1. And there we go. Now, we've got some nice standing water. But like I said, I want to add some variation to it. So, in our shader editor, and let me try to give the screen a little bit more space. See part of our puddle there. We're going to hit Shift A, and we're going to add in a, well, actually, before I do any of this, let me save this. I'll save this as a new version. Let's call this wetness. Okay. Saved. Always good to save. All right, so we're going to add in a texture and noise texture. And I'm going to move this below my principal shader. Actually, I can click this little arrow right here and collapse that. Just get that out of the way so I can focus on my displacement. So I got my texture. I want to be able to control where the texture is, so I'm going to hit Control, Shift, and T. Whoops, let me make sure we have that. Sorry, Control T. That's all I want. It's just Control T. Add my texture coordinates and my mapping nodes. I want to make sure this is... we'll leave it on generated for now. We'll probably end up switching this to UV, but we'll leave it on generated for now. And then we want this to be affecting the displacement. So I need to add in a vector displacement node. Okay, we'll connect that up to displacement, and we will connect the color, or actually, no, we're going to grab the factor. If we Control-Shift click on the noise texture, okay, let me go underneath it so we can see what this looks like. There's what the factor looks like, and there's what the color looks like. I don't want any of the color data. I just want the factor. So I'm going to plug this into the height. And you can see that that's what our displacement looks like. It's a little bit on the extreme side. So let's first bring the scale down. I'm going to go 0.05. This is what I found worked pretty well for the scale. Go back to the noise texture here. And then I think I'm going to Control-Shift-Click on the principal so we can kind of see the final result. We're going to leave it there for now. It's a little tricky to see what these results are doing. You can see it a little bit. You can see some variation here, which is nice. We can also see that maybe now that we have some displacement here on the texture, maybe you want to move this down. So GZ, I'm going to hold down Shift so I have really fine-tuned control here. Move it down just a little bit. A little bit more, maybe. Okay, see, it just kind of backs off the amount of puddles. Maybe I went too far. You can leave it there. Okay. So we've got that now. The last one that I want to do is going to be the curb, or the gutter. I want to add some standing water in the curb, because it doesn't make sense that there'd be standing water on the sidewalk and the street, but nothing in the gutter. So let's make sure we do that once Blender. There we go. Thank you, Blender. Okay, you can also see that the puddle is, in 3D space, is actually kind of just above the sidewalk, but when it renders, because of that displacement, it pushes it up. It looks a little bit better. Okay. I'm also going to... I'm going to select both of these things, the sidewalk and the puddles, and I'm going to move them down just a little bit, just underneath the curb. There we go. I'm also going to do the same thing with the road. I'm going to grab the road, GZ, I'm going to move it down just underneath the curb, so we've got a little bit of a lip there. And really what I should do is take this edge of the road, I'm just going to extrude it down a little bit, then I'll extrude it down a little bit more. And we'll add in a... actually, instead of this edge right here, you see this, I got this edge selected. I'm going to dissolve that edge, just delete the edge loop. And I'll just grab that edge, and we'll just hit Control B, and we'll just bevel it ever so slightly. Scroll up so I've got 3 edges, keep it kind of sharp. There we go. Okay. Now we've got a little bit of a natural crack there. So I want to add the puddles to the curb as well. So I'm going to do the same thing that I did before. I'm going to go into local view on the curb, go in the top view, and we snap the cursor to selected. You can see that the cursor snaps all the way over there. So I'm going to hit Q, set the origin to the geometry. Also see that if we go up to object set origin, origin to geometry, Shift S, snap the cursor back to geometry. We're going to add in another plane. We're going to rename this. We're going to call this curb puddles. Tab into edit mode on it. And again, GX, snap it to the end there. Grab these two, GX, snap it to the end there. GY and snap. And don't actually need to snap it in this direction. Because what we want is we don't want to cover the whole curb. We want this to be lower. So I'm going to hit G, make sure I'm in object mode. I am. GZ to move it down. And we can see, we hold down Shift. Whoops. Let me make this a little bit larger so we can see a little clearer. Okay. So GZ, I'm going to hold down Shift. And if we get it to the right spot, we can see we get just a little bit of water running all the way through. Looks great, except we also have this area where we've got the storm drain. We don't want water there, so let me add in, let me go into edit mode, add in a edge loop right there on the end, GX, and we'll snap it right there. We'll add another edge loop, and we'll snap it right there. Okay, so there's the two edges that I added. Then we can select that face. Actually, before I do that, let me add in some edge loops going this way. Okay, now we can select those faces and delete them. And then let's add in some faces over here, or some edge loops, excuse me, and some edge loops over here. Something like that will work. Okay. So now we've got those in place. Let's assign our puddle texture, or puddle material, excuse me. Assign puddles to that. Okay. So puddles are there. We can see our preview looks actually pretty good. But in the viewport, it doesn't look too great. And we can see this even more clearly if we Control-Shift-Click on this noise texture node. You see how stretched out everything is and how undefined everything is? That's what we need to fix. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to UV unwrap both my puddle textures, actually. Okay, so let me get out a local view here. Find my curb, there it is. From the top view here, and we'll hit U and unwrap. There we go, that unwrapped nicely. And then let me find my sidewalk puddles. There they are. Select everything. Oops. U. Keep hitting I don't know why. U and unwrap. And there we go. Okay, so make sure we have correct ratios there, and that all looks good. Okay, we can jump back over to shading. Now let's grab this. Okay. Look underneath. Still looking a little bit stretched. So now that we have it UV unwrapped, let's change our shaders here from using generated texture coordinates to UVs. There we go. So now it's not stretched anymore, but you can see that it's super subtle. Kind of difficult to see the effect. So what we can do to strengthen that, or at least have a little bit more control over it, is we can add a color ramp to control that intensity. So I'm going to hit Shift A. I'm going to add a converter color ramp between the noise texture and the displacement node. And I'll Control-Shift-Click on this so we can see the results of it. But now, what we can do is we can drag up the bottom side. Oops. Grab this node right here. And drag this up. And now you can see that the dark areas are getting darker. Okay. And we can drag this to the right, and we get some really high contrast. Now, we don't want that, but I wanted to just kind of show you the result here. And because we're using this to control our displacement, what we're doing is all the black areas are going to get pushed down, and all the white areas are going to be pushed up vertically. Okay. So we can use that to kind of control what our puddles look like. I'm going to leave this all the way at 1, and I'll take black color and I'll, well, kind of something like that. I don't want to push it too far. Okay. And I think I will also, I don't want to have it be so extreme. So I'm going to click on the white node and I'm going to drag this down just a little bit. Get kind of a more neutral. Right, let's actually set the value to 0.5. Okay, there we go. So there's what our puddles are going to look like. Let's go into rendered view and see what the displacement is actually doing. All right, we can see that because of the displacement, it's pushing everything down. We are not seeing that in the view. So we need to select our object, hit G and Z and move it up. I'm going to hold down Shift to move it up subtly. Okay, there we go. And I don't feel like I'm getting quite enough subdivision here. So let's make some adjustments. Let's look at our modifier. Okay, I don't even have a subsurface modifier. That would be why. So let's add our subdivision surface and turn on adaptive subdivision. You'll see, okay, that's looking better already. We're getting some variation. It's not just a straight line. Let's move it down a little bit, though. Maybe something like that. Whoops. I like seeing a little bit of kind of a break up there. I don't want it to look like it's a flood or a downpour, because we're not going to be making any other surfaces wet. I just want it to look like it had recently rained, or there was recently a lot of water on the street. So maybe something like that. And then if we go back to our color ramp, grab this neutral gray tone and just kind of bring it up a little bit, you can see that those white areas are going to increase the size of the puddle. Okay, so we have some really cool control there. I love having that ability. Okay, so once we have that, the last thing I want to work with is this end here and kind of how that terminates. Let's get out a local view and see what that looks like with the storm drain in place. And we'll also, in our shader editor, Control-Shift-Click back on our principled node so we get the proper shading. Okay. I think that looks all right. I'm going to go into edit mode on our puddles here. I want it kind of curling over the edge a little bit more, though. Feels weird that it's stopping right there. So we'll go into solid view, tab in edit mode, go into vertex select, and GX, and we'll snap it. We'll say like right there. So right as it hits that crack, that's where it's kind of falling down. And same thing here, I'll select this edge, GX, snap, and again, kind of right there, hits that crack, and it kind of falls between the grate and the frame. Okay. Let's also make sure we set our subdivision to simple deformation. And I'm going to hit U and just unwrap that one more time since we modified the geometry. Okay, let's go back into, I'll select the grates, puddles, and the curb, and I'll go into local view. So we've got just that part selected. And I'll go back into rendered view, and we'll see what this looks like. Yeah, I think that's pretty subtle, but I think it works. And then, what we can do is if we want to adjust kind of where the puddles are positioned, let me grab the puddle object here. First of all, let me do that a little bit. Maybe we'll adjust the scale up to like 0.06. 0.052 maybe. That's better. And then I think also we can shift the displacement around a little bit. So I'll grab the X and, oh, actually, before we shift it, I forgot to mess around with the noise texture scale itself. So let's take a look at that real quick. Now this is going to be something that I think is going to work a little bit better if we look at the other puddle, or at least all those at the same time. So we got those puddles, the sidewalk, and the curb selected. Yes, we got all of those selected. We'll go into local view here. And grab the puddle again. I'm going to set the scale to 7.35 is what I used before, and I liked that. Okay, let me Control-Shift-Click on this so we can kind of see this. Okay, so here's the default scale is 5. I just scaled it down, so 7.35 makes the texture appear a little bit smaller. And then I actually didn't really mess with anything else. I didn't want to add a whole lot of detail. I wanted this to stay pretty smooth. So detail of 2 was fine for me. Maybe even go lower. I'm going to go like 1.2, smooth it out a little bit more. Okay, and then once we have that, like I said, I wanted to kind of adjust where the puddles ended up. So we can go over to our mapping node and then grab X and just kind of click and drag and move it over to where we think is a good kind of termination point here. And what I'm looking at is right in here. I'm looking to see a point that looks kind of believable for how the water would fall off. So it doesn't have to be much. I'm going to keep going. Oh, I had something there that I liked, but it's gone now. Okay, well, I think we'll go with maybe... What did I do? I did negative 0.09. My numbers aren't quite the same here. I'll set the detail back to 2. And we'll go with that, maybe. I don't like that, actually. I'm trying not to be too picky here, but maybe something like that. Okay. So now that we have our puddles in place, and I'm pretty good with that, that's it for the video. So let me get out of local view here, and Control-Shift-Click back on our principled shader, so we're seeing the final result. And there we go. Now we have a wet ground, wet road. We got some standing water, and that's all looking pretty good. Oh, there is one last thing we need to do, actually. The sidewalk puddles are now, because we added that displacement modifier to them, we need to bring those back up. So let me grab just the puddles and the sidewalk to just speed this, speed the render up so I can do this faster. So GZ, hold down Shift to make it smaller adjustments. And okay, you can see the water starting to creep in there. Kind of like a flood. Yeah, I think something like that looks really good. I'm happy with that. Okay, get out of local view now. And there we go. Now we've got our standing water. And we'll go back to our scene world so we can see what that looks like with all of our neon, especially when we turn on the electrical panels. Okay, that's all looking pretty good. There's one thing that we are, as I made this change, I realized that just seeing the black void in the background really doesn't work for this. At least not for the reflections, because the reflections look good here because we see the lights that we added. We turn the vending machine back on, so we'll see those reflections in the ground as well, which is cool. But if we look at the camera this way, all those puddles are just reflecting black. And that doesn't really... It doesn't work. I want this scene to feel like it exists somewhere, not just completely in a black void, even though that's where it is. So what I'm going to do is go in my shader editor. I'm going to change this from object to world. Okay. And instead of adding a volume shader and to get some of that volumetric fog, what I want to do is add in a image texture. So I'm going to hit Shift-A, add texture, environment texture. We'll connect that up to the color. And then I'm going to open up, go to my HDRI library. This is the one that I'm using. Kind of download any one that you want. I just like this texture because it's got plenty of different colors of lights that are going to work really well. Now, by default, what this does is it actually adds the light of the world, of the background to the scene. It actually contributes light to it. So if I bring this all the way down, you'll see that the road and the walls get darker. If I bring this back up to 1, now we're going to see some of that light. And I don't really want that because I think it removes some of the contrast. I like it better without it. However, what it also does is it reflects in our environment, which is awesome. So what we're going to do is go to our world settings here, our world properties, and where it says ray visibility, we're going to expand that out. And this is, we can set the individual light ray visibility. So if we turn off camera, it's now no longer visible to the camera, but it's still casting light on all of our diffuse and glossy surfaces, all of the transmission, all the volume. It's still affecting all of those things. Now, I don't need volume scatter, I don't need transmission, and I don't need glossy. The only one I really need is, or excuse me, I don't need diffuse. The only one I really need is glossy. I just want to see its highlights on the ground. And we have that, which is perfect. Now, you can see that the world background is a little bit maybe low res. I think I'm using a 4K map. You can go higher, but another thing that we can do instead is we can just adjust the roughness, particularly in the puddles. So if I grab our sidewalk puddles and I can go back to our materials, or we can even go here, expand that back up. This is where maybe this roughness, we don't want it to be 0.01, maybe we want to go 0.03. And it's just going to blur that just a little bit. Same thing with transmission rough. Well, transmission roughness doesn't really matter because it's not affecting that. But that will help a little bit. And we're not going to be, zoomed right in on a puddle, at least not looking that way, so it's not that big of a deal. But it gives a lot more life to our scene. We wouldn't get this like green and purple streak across the ground if we didn't have that there. So it just adds this nice little touch of realism. Okay, I think that's actually it for this video. The next one will be kind of a quick look at some render settings and getting renders, and then the following video after that will be post-processing, and then we'll move on to actual animation this semester. So that's it for now, and I will see you in the next video.